It's my great pleasure now to introduce your panel chair, Greg Sheridan. Greg is the Foreign Affairs Editor at the Australian newspaper in Australia. It may surprise you to know, because he looks youthful, that we were born 2 weeks apart, 2 miles apart in Sydney way back in the 1950s. He doesn't have the problem I have. I looked in the mirror the other day as I was getting ready to go to bed, and I said to Julia, "Oh, darling, look, the hair's silver, everything's sinking, it's lines everywhere. I'm feeling demoralised, say something to cheer me up." And she said, "I've been thinking for a while how remarkable your eyesight has remained." Rebecca Heinrich, I count a good friend, lives in McLean, Virginia, and with her family. She writes brilliantly on family, but also on defence with Hudson. What's the link? She understands only too well the importance of a secure environment for those children going forward. That should motivate us all. And Andrew Hastie, who is the Shadow Minister for Defence in Australia, a very fine friend, and we've been friends for a long time. He is a former officer in the renowned Australian SAS, and as a former president of the US said to me once, if there was one group of people in the world that he respected above all else, it was the Australian SAS. 2 tours of Afghanistan, and I think one of the Middle East. Over to you, Greg, and I think this should be extraordinarily interesting and important.
Well, John, thanks very much. Thanks very much, everybody. So it's our job here to cast a pall of the greatest gloom that we can over what has been a cheerful day. And Rebecca, I want to start by putting a question to you. We live in, I would suggest, the most dangerous strategic environment that we've confronted since World War II. All of the West's most important and powerful enemies are attacking us at the moment. Right now, Iran is attacking Israel through Hezbollah and Hamas and the Iraqi militias in Syria and the Houthis in Yemen. And it is also firing on American positions in the Middle East. Russia is attacking Ukraine and really attacking the whole of NATO right now. China is engaged in massive cyber theft and ramming Philippines boats in the South China Sea, transgressing Japanese airspace. And the enemies that are not attacking us are proclaiming that they will attack us soon. Every time Xi Jinping talks to his troops, he says, prepare for war. North Korea is supplying, and Iran is supplying weapons to Russia. Russia is hosting Hamas. All of this is happening, and no one in the West is substantially increasing their defence expenditure. No one in the West is substantially increasing their defence industrial base. Everyone in the West, apart from the United States, is the psychological equivalent of the Afghan government. Certainly Americans will always handle it, and they'll never lose, and they'll never leave us. Why is the West, and internally probably we've never been more divided or had a greater lack of morale. Why is the West so complacent in the face of such manifest threat?
Well, thank you all for this opportunity to address you and for the easy question to kick us off. So I think I would answer the question this way. Really, everything that we heard today helps us understand what's going on in the West. And really, when I think about my work and which powers present the greatest threat to the United States, I believe it's, you have to look at the will of those regimes and their capability to carry out that harm. China has the greatest capability and will to supplant the United States as the preeminent power, and the US system of democratic alliances. And then you have the Russians, as you ably pointed out, who are really ultimately trying to push the United States out of Europe and disintegrate NATO and reestablish sort of this. I mean, Putin sees himself really more czar-like than anything. And then you have the Iranians, and they're dead serious on creating this Islamic revolution that controls the Middle East and beyond. And they're very serious about this, ideologically very committed, and then have various capacities to carry that out. At the end of the Cold War, the United States and our Western allies really began, and you could see this in particular with American presidents, Republican and Democrats, over the last 40 years. It began to change during the Trump administration, I would submit a little bit, and we're kind of trying to figure it out now during the Biden administration. And it was really at the end that we really reached the end of history, that major power conflict was so unlikely to happen, and that we had evolved as a human race such that a major power conflict was so barbaric and so a thing of the past, and it could be replaced with commercialism. And that if we bring the Chinese into the global economy, that they would become fat, happy, and liberal. Well, it turns out they got fat, happy, and stayed communists. And so we have Xi Jinping, who is a committed Marxist-Leninist, and he's deeply serious about it, and it is a part of his ideology. And I think the West has sort of lost its moral imagination, who we are, and what it means to be liberal Democrats in the truest sense. And so that complacency has set in, and it has left us ill-prepared. So you mentioned, why aren't we disarming, or why aren't we rearming? And part of that was, after the Cold War, we did disarm. We rotted out our defense industrial base, and part of it makes sense. We weren't, it's expensive to keep the defense industrial base able to produce the necessary weapons we need at that scale over a long period of time. But we've been very slow to realize what is upon us. And you can see that now with the United States' very, very slow realization that it is time. We can see this with our arming of Ukraine. And I believe that we can help Ukraine prevail over Russia, and I believe we can help the Israelis have what they need, and I believe the United States can provide that hard power deterrence versus the Iranians. And I believe that the United States can be rushing right now to put hard power with our allies into the Pacific in order to deter Chinese aggression. But we have to believe that it's worth doing. And so that's why I think we need both of those pieces, everything we discussed today, to get back our confidence that we are worth protecting, but then it requires an enormous amount of statecraft and motivation to rebuild the defense industrial base to do that.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. Andrew, leading on from Rebecca's comments there, an enormous amount of what she suggests we require is kind of willpower. The Chinese are very invested doctrinally in the idea of Western decline. If we're faced, I mean, one interesting example, really, this is not quite Western decline, but Taiwan all these years has hardly provided anything for its own defence, you know, it's kind of left everything to the Americans. If we're faced with real conflict, does our society, does our economy, does our military, do our people have the resilience to sustain themselves through that?
It's a great question, Greg, and I think of the former boxer Mike Tyson and what he said. That is, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And the question we need to ask is, do we have a plan to deal with all these threats? And can we take a punch in the mouth? And I think there are serious and grave questions that we need to answer in terms of our defence preparedness and willingness to sustain ourselves in a crisis. God forbid that should happen. But I want to go to a far more elemental level, and to use Neil's fourth category of associational life in terms of generation. I'm really concerned about our resilience in the smallest organising group in society, which is the family, the little platoons. And to take you back to July 2009 in Afghanistan, it was a moment which really crystallised for us, or for me. We're out on patrol, and I was sitting in Overwatch. There was a road about 50 metres behind me. There was an Afghan family travelling in a Toyota Hilux. And they struck an improvised explosive device that was meant for us. The vehicle was destroyed. We rendered first aid. And I remember my team asking them, what are you going to do now? And they said, we're walking home. And off they went. They walked off, bloodied, bruised, battered, but alive, and they walked off. And after hearing what Miriam had to say today, and Jonathan about the increased rates of teen suicide, depression, I think about that Afghan family, and I think about us. And if the shoe was on the other foot and we were facing some sort of invasion, would we be as resilient as that family? And that's the question that we need to ask.
So Andrew, that's a very challenging answer. Neil, like everyone, I greatly enjoyed your lecture. I want to ask you this question. It seems to me that one reason we're so bad at predicting what our enemies are going to do is that we project onto them our own psychological and social and political assumptions. We never really believe that they believe in anything other than the economic good life. We just think they're a bit inefficient about getting there. But it seems to me Xi Jinping is a really orthodox believing communist. There's a kind of Harvard Business School version of dopey sinology which says, you have to look through Chinese history, grasshopper, everything is Confucius and blah, blah, blah. When I was a correspondent in China, Confucius was suppressed. Xi Jinping has spent years of his life studying Marxism-Leninism. He hasn't spent a day studying Confucius. The Ayatollahs in Iran, they really believe, they have a profound religious belief in their Islamist vision. Even Vladimir Putin, as near to just a rough dictator as you can get, he has bought on to the Alexander Dugin myth of Russian exceptionalism and nationalism and so on. Would you agree, Neil, or how can you explain, or is it true that these leaders have beliefs which we find very difficult to understand, and therefore we're very bad at predicting what they're going to do?
Well, I think Rebecca already said that that's right, and I agree with her. Part of the difficulty we have in understanding conviction, ideological conviction, is that we have none. It's very hard to understand that kind of motivation if your belief system has been so eroded that it becomes at best a cost-benefit analysis problem. And this is why I wanted to emphasize the, I think, malign role that has been played by the degeneration of our institutions. If you want to answer the question, why do young people have such a negative view of the only democracy in the Middle East? Why are they willing to demonstrate on campuses in support of a terrorist action? The answer must lie in the kind of education that they've received. So I think there are two problems. One, I think the current leadership elite in the West, with, of course, some honorable exceptions, but the current leadership elite, produced as it has been in the United States by the Harvards and the Yales and the Penns, they don't have a great level of conviction in their own institutions. They don't have the same sense of passionate conviction that their enemies have. So they can't really comprehend the reality that Xi Jinping thought is essentially a derivative of Marxism-Leninism. I was told by the head of propaganda at the CCP several years ago, pre-pandemic, oh yes, the Standing Committee is rereading Marx and Engels. We just find that hard to believe because we bought a lot of baloney about win-win economic cooperation in the period after 2001. So there's that. But the second thing that really concerns me is that the young in the West don't believe in nothing. They believe in things, but those things are not liberal democracy. Look at the surveys that have been done when it comes to environmental questions. Yasha Monk has pointed out that many young people in Europe and elsewhere will embrace authoritarian solutions if you tell them that that's the only way to get to net zero. So it's not just that we believe in not terribly much. Increasingly, young people in the West have illiberal views and are therefore highly susceptible to the propaganda of our enemies.
Rebecca, thanks so much, Neil. Rebecca, very briefly, war is terribly messy and very morally complex. But in the West, we have grappled with how to wage war morally in the just war theory. I understand you're doing some work on that. And of course, there's this great discussion about is Israel in Gaza observing proportionality, which is an element of just war theory. But what is the relevance of just war theory today?
Another softball. So it's critically important. It's directly related to what we're talking about today, and the reason is this. So a lot of the conversation surrounding Israel's rightful response to defend itself and destroy Hamas has centered on these questions about whether or not Israel is abiding by the laws of armed conflict. And I've seen two things come up out of that conversation. You have some people very, very defensive of Israel say, it doesn't matter if it's compliant or not, they should be able to defend themselves. And then you have those who are very anti-Israel and they're making it very, very difficult for them to comply and to meet based on their idea of how one would do that. To which my response is, oh no, actually, abiding by the laws of armed conflict is part of what makes us extremely different, completely different than those outside the West. I use that sort of loosely. And the reason that is because we value life. We value life. We value the lives of the civilians of our adversaries more than our adversaries value the lives of the civilians. And I would argue very forcefully that Israel is doing that. But they're not going to have defenders at the UN. It's going to have to come from our allies going out and making the case that they are doing that. But it's very critical because the laws of armed conflict and international law is really based on the just war doctrine. That's what we're all arguing about. Proportionality, discrimination comes from the just war doctrine. And so it's part of international law. And then the United States has our own explanation for how we do that, all the way up to how we even think about nuclear deterrence. And so it's part of what makes us different and apart from those outside the civilized world.
Thanks, Rebecca. Andrew, I think we might have to make this the last question because you can't see this, but there's a clock with very threatening remarks there.
Are Australians observing that kind of thing these days?
No. In fact, I thought we might extend the
development
session for another 45 minutes. I know nobody wants to get to a drink or anything. No, I jest. So, Andrew, our last question is to you. Some Conservatives argue that government is the problem, and what you need, the better government is a smaller government, that all you need is to get government out of the way. I've never understood how that could operate in a national security context, but what's your reflection on that?
Well, Congressman McCarthy today said that government is the problem, and I respectfully disagree. I think bad government is the problem. I think what people are crying out for is good government. So I putting my cards on the table, I'm not a libertarian. Otherwise I wouldn't be in Parliament, frankly. But what people want is order. Having done essentially a master's in cultural anthropology overseas, observing what it's like where there is no rule of law, where violence and power are the two locomotives driving a society. I've got to tell you, when I came back to Australia, I was so grateful for what we have. Government is a blessing. What people are crying out for, though, are good leaders who provide moral leadership, strategic leadership, who exercise prudence, wisdom, all those virtues which we know to be true, but need to be practiced.
And it kind of cheeky kind of follow up. The other thing is we seem to have governments now which can't actually do anything. We're the sort of can-do-nothing kind of nation. You know, the NDIS and the Snowy Mountains scheme, everything. It's just one catastrophe after another, and all of our nations are mired in massive debt. You know, the British state has never been bigger, but you try and get a passport or a driver's license or something. I mean, where does the effectiveness of government come in?
Well, it comes down to courage. I know this seems simple. We're all looking for some sort of answer that's, hard to find. But really, it comes back to the basics: good leadership, courage, which is essential to political leadership, and then the prudence to actually deliver a political outcome. And I think that's what we need more of.
Rebecca.
I had one more thing that I'd be so mad at myself if I didn't say it, so I'm going to borrow a little bit more time. The one thing that Andrew was saying made me think of this is, completely agree with him. It's also, I really like this challenge to all of us, and especially those of us who are parents and grandparents in the room too, about the different things that we can do based on Jonathan's discussion about tech. And what are the things that if we did that would make it easier on all of us as we raise kids. I have 5 children. That tends to be the thing on my bio that people find the most interesting out of everything else that I've done. And I did potty train all 5 of them as well.
Outstanding.
And
you deserve a medal, Hero of the Soviet Union.
Thank you. But it's really important, really, really important. You know, when I go to college campuses now, we talk about what do college students think about things, and when I tell them to get TikTok off their phone, get TikTok off your phone, and they say, give me your best reasons why, and I tell them about how that China is stealing your data. China is going to manipulate you in some way. They could invade Taiwan and change the way you think about what your government is doing, and they'll make you oppose the United States coming. And they don't care. I can't even get I can't get them to the lights to come on for them to care. And I said, doesn't it just bother you that you're being manipulated by the Chinese Communist Party in some sense? They don't seem to be bothered by that. And so I guess I would just leave with these thoughts as somebody who thinks about these things with my own children and in my professional life, is that our children are being catechized by something. They're constantly being catechized. And so if you do not catechize them such that they know their worth and know what is true and good and beautiful, they will not be inoculated against the authoritarian influence that is coming and that is here.
And our very last word to Neil.
I love overrunning on clocks. I think it's part of the spirit of liberty to disregard.
I want the
any
organisers to
electronic
note that it's
timer.
Neil's decision here.
We did start a bit late, so it's a little bit like the Premier League, 5, maybe 10 minutes of extra time. Look, we're the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. I agree entirely with Andrew's point. Good government is preferable to bad government, and a radical libertarian solution has never been plausible. That's not even what Adam Smith argues for in The All-Important Wealth of Nations. But, and this was the key point I wanted to emphasize, the reason we're here today in, I think, impressively large numbers is that we believe in the power of voluntary association. We don't expect the good government to sort these problems out for us. We're here today, I'm here today, because we believe that creating new institutions like ARC and some of the other institutions that I've been involved in setting up in recent years, like the new university at Austin, these new institutions that we, responsible citizens, create, those are the solutions that we need. If we can't expect it to be fixed by politicians, with all due respect to you, Andrew, we've got to fix it ourselves, ladies and gentlemen.
Well said, Neil. And, ladies and gentlemen, we've had such a good day. I feel like a fat kid in a candy store. I'm probably not allowed to say that, am I? It's such an honour to...
Instant cancellation.
Yeah, everywhere else I'll be cancelled. Such an honour to share the platform with Andrew and Rebecca and Neil. Thank you very much. Have a nice night tonight.
Thank you.